The cursor blinked accusingly, each flash a reminder of the email I shouldn't have opened. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed by the weight of what I'd just discovered. Tony, my husband of 10 years, was having an affair. Rebecca, you coming down for dinner? Tony's voice floated up the stairs, shattering my stunned silence. I swallowed hard, willing my voice to remain steady. Just a minute. Closing the laptop, I took a deep breath and made my way downstairs. The aroma of Tony's signature pasta dish filled the air, but my stomach churned with nausea. Tony stood at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce. He glanced up, flashing that charming smile that had once made my heart flutter. Now it made my skin crawl. There you are, he said. I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in your work again. I forced a smile. Just wrapping up a few things. As I set the table, my mind raced. How long had this been going on? Who was she? The email had been vague, but the intimacy was unmistakable. So how was your day? Tony asked, ladling sauce over perfectly al dente penne. I stared at the plate before me, the red sauce suddenly reminding me of the anger bubbling just beneath my surface. Fine, I managed. Yours? Oh, same old academic grind, he chuckled. Sometimes I wonder if these students even appreciate the caliber of education they're receiving. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to remind him that not everyone had the privilege of an Ivy League education. It was an old argument, one that always left me feeling small and inadequate. Speaking of which, Tony continued, oblivious to my inner turmoil, Mother called today. She's insisting we attend the university's fundraising gala next month. I suppressed a groan. Martha, my mother-in-law, was a force to be reckoned with. Do we have to? Tony's eyes narrowed. Rebecca, you know how important these events are. It's not just about the university. It's about maintaining our standing in the community. Our standing. As if I had any part in it beyond being Tony's arm candy at stuffy academic functions. Of course, I said, pushing the pasta around my plate. I'll make sure to clear my schedule. Tony nodded, satisfied. Good. Oh, and Mother mentioned she'd like to have lunch with you next week. Something about helping you select an appropriate gown for the gala. I gripped my fork tighter, imagining Martha's thinly veiled criticisms of my fashion choices. How thoughtful of her. Now, Rebecca, Tony said, his tone patronizing, I know you and Mother don't always see eye to eye, but she means well. Try to appreciate her guidance. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the condescension, the suffocating expectations. Tony, I need to ask you something. He looked up, a fork full of pasta halfway to his mouth. Yes? Who's Melanie? The color drained from Tony's face. He set his fork down slowly. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice trembling. I saw the email, Tony. I know about the affair. For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then Tony's expression hardened. You went through my emails? That's a violation of my privacy, Rebecca. I laughed bitterly. Your privacy? What about our marriage vows? You're being hysterical, Tony said, standing up. This is exactly why I can't discuss certain aspects of my life with you. You're too emotional, too quick to jump to conclusions. Conclusions, I sputtered. Tony, I read the email. It was clear as day. He shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. Rebecca, darling, you're misinterpreting things. This is why I've always said your lack of higher education leaves you at a disadvantage. You don't have the critical thinking skills to... The sound of my hand connecting with his cheek echoed through the kitchen. Tony stumbled back, shock written across his face. How dare you? I hissed. How dare you try to gaslight me and insult my intelligence in the same breath? As Tony opened his mouth to respond, my phone buzzed. A text from my father. Hey, sweetie, just checking in. Everything okay? I grabbed my phone and car keys. I'm leaving, I announced. Don't wait up. As I slammed the front door behind me, I realized my hands were shaking. What had I just done? Where would I go? For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. I spent the night at a nearby hotel, tossing and turning as my mind replayed every moment of my confrontation with Tony. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I needed answers, and I wasn't leaving our house until I got them. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Tony's car was still there. Good. No running away this time. I found him in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as I entered, his eyes bloodshot and weary. Rebecca, he said, his voice hoarse. I was worried sick. Where were you? Don't pretend you care, I snapped. We need to talk about Melanie. Tony's jaw clenched. I told you, you're misinterpreting things. Then explain it to me, Tony. Help me understand how I'm misinterpreting an email where you tell another woman you can't wait to hold her in your arms again. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It's not what you think. She's a colleague. We're working on a sensitive case together. I laughed bitterly. A case that requires declarations of love? It's complicated, Rebecca. There are aspects of my work that you wouldn't understand. Try me, I challenged. Tony stood up, towering over me. This is exactly why I can't discuss these things with you. You lack the educational background to grasp the nuances of legal strategy. His words stung, but I refused to back down. Don't you dare use my education as an excuse for your infidelity. I may not have an Ivy League degree, but I'm not stupid, Tony. I never said you were stupid, he retorted. But there's a reason I'm the one working at a prestigious law firm while you play around at your little tech startup. Rage boiled inside me. Play around? I'm the director of operations at a company that's revolutionizing green energy. Just because it's not some centuries-old boys' club doesn't make it any less valuable. Tony scoffed. Please, we both know your father pulled strings to get you that job. How dare you? I hissed. I earned my position through hard work and talent, unlike you, who rode Daddy's coattails straight into the family firm. His eyes flashed dangerously. Watch your mouth, Rebecca. You have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, I think I do, I shot back. I think I'm finally seeing you clearly for the first time in our marriage. You're nothing but a narcissistic, cheating bastard who... The sharp ring of the doorbell cut through our argument. We both froze, staring at each other. Who could that be? I asked. Tony's face paled. I'm not sure. I moved towards the door, but Tony grabbed my arm. Wait, Rebecca. Let me get it. His sudden nervousness set off alarm bells in my head. I yanked my arm free and strode to the front door, throwing it open. A statuesque blonde stood on our porch, her perfect makeup unable to hide her surprise at seeing me. Oh, she said, her voice soft and cultured. I'm sorry, I must have the wrong house. I'm looking for Tony Green. My stomach dropped. You've got the right house, I said coldly. And you are? She blinked, confusion evident on her face. I'm Melanie Cartwright. Tony and I work together at the firm, and you are. I'm Rebecca, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Tony's wife. Melanie's eyes widened in shock. Wife? But Tony said he told me he was divorced. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the doorframe for support, turning to face Tony, who stood frozen in the hallway. You told her we were divorced? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tony's face was ashen. Rebecca, I can explain. But I'd heard enough. I turned back to Melanie, whose perfect composure had crumbled into distress. I think you'd better come in, I said. It seems we have a lot to discuss. As Melanie stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of our neighbor across the street, watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. In that moment, I realized our carefully constructed life was about to come crashing down around us. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop it. The aftermath of Melanie's visit left our house feeling like a war zone. Tony had retreated to his study, leaving me to deal with the emotional wreckage. I was just about to call my father when the doorbell rang again. This time it was Martha, Tony's mother, her face pinched with concern. Rebecca, dear, she said, brushing past me into the foyer. I just ran into Diane across the street. She said there was quite a scene here earlier. What on earth is going on? I sighed, closing the door. Martha, now's not really a good time. She waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense. Where's Anthony? I need to speak with him immediately. Before I could stop her, Martha marched towards Tony's study. I followed, my stomach knotting with dread. Tony looked up as we entered, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Mother, what are you doing here? Martha's eyes darted between us. I came to find out what all this fuss is about. Anthony, explain yourself. Tony shot me a pleading look, but I crossed my arms, refusing to bail him out. He swallowed hard. Mother, there's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I scoffed. Is that what we're calling it now? Martha's eyes narrowed. Rebecca, please, let Anthony speak. I bit my tongue, seething as Tony spun a web of half-truths and outright lies. He painted Melanie as a confused colleague, me as an overreacting, jealous wife. With each word, I felt my anger rising. That's not what happened, I interjected. Tony's been having an affair. He told Melanie we were divorced, Martha gasped, turning to Tony. Anthony, is this true? Tony's face hardened. Of course not, Mother. Rebecca's letting her imagination run wild again. You know how she gets. How I get? I sputtered. You lying, manipulative. That's quite enough, Martha cut in. She turned to me, her voice ice cold. Rebecca, I think you need to calm down and stop making these wild accusations. Anthony is a respected member of this community. He would never engage in such behavior. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? You're just going to take his word for it? Martha drew herself up to her full height. I know my son, Rebecca. Perhaps if you'd put as much effort into your marriage as you do into your little career, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The room fell silent. I stared at Martha, then at Tony, who couldn't even meet my eyes. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Martha blinked. Excuse me? I said, get out. Both of you. This is my house, too, and I want you out. Tony stood up. Rebecca, you're being hysterical. Let's all calm down and... No, I cut him off. I'm done calming down. I'm done being gaslighted and belittled. Get out of my house now. Martha looked to Tony, clearly expecting him to put me in my place. But something in my expression must have warned him off because he simply nodded. Come on, Mother, he said softly. Let's give Rebecca some space. As they left, I sank onto the couch, my whole body shaking. The house felt suddenly empty, echoing with the ghosts of all the lies and betrayals that had filled it. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. On my way, sweetie. Hang in there. Tears welled up in my eyes. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone in this fight. As I waited for my father to arrive, I began to plan. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. And I was done playing by Tony's rules. I picked up my laptop, determination stealing my resolve. It was time to dig deeper into Tony's life, his work, his secrets. If he wanted a war, I'd give him one. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. My father's steady presence had been a balm to my frayed nerves, but as he prepared to leave after a week-long visit, anxiety gnawed at my insides. I'd been avoiding Tony, throwing myself into work and my clandestine investigation of his affairs, both personal and professional. You sure you'll be all right, Becky? Dad asked, his weathered hands gripping his suitcase. I forced a smile. I'll be fine, Dad. Thanks for everything. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I steeled myself for what I needed to do next. I'd stumbled upon some troubling discrepancies in Tony's firm's financial records, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. Back in my home office, I pored over the documents I'd managed to access. Numbers swam before my eyes, but a pattern was emerging, one that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just an affair. Tony had been embezzling funds from the firm. My hands shook as I picked up my phone. I had to be sure. Melanie? It's Rebecca. We need to talk. An hour later, I sat across from Melanie in a quiet cafe, watching her face crumple as I laid out my suspicions. I had no idea, she whispered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously on the table. I mean, I knew something was off with some of the accounts, but Tony always had an explanation. He's good at that, I said bitterly. Explanations, excuses, lies. Melanie's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. What can I do to help? Together, we pieced together the extent of Tony's deception. By the time we parted ways, I felt simultaneously vindicated and devastated. The man I'd married was a fraud in every sense of the word. Back home, I sat in the darkening living room, my mind racing. What was my next move? Confront Tony? Go to the authorities? My finger hovered over my father's number in my phone when I heard the front door open. Rebecca? Tony's voice called out. Are you home? I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. In here. Tony appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, a forced smile on his face. Hey, I thought we could order in tonight, maybe talk things over? Sure, I said, keeping my voice neutral. We definitely need to talk. As Tony busied himself with menus, I watched him, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The charm, the confidence, it was all a carefully constructed facade. So, Tony said, settling into his armchair. I know things have been tense lately, but I really think we can work this out. Maybe take a vacation, just the two of us. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A vacation won't fix this, Tony. His smile faltered. What do you mean? I know about the embezzlement, I said quietly. The color drained from Tony's face. For a moment he looked like he might deny it, but then his shoulders sagged. How did you find out? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Does it matter? I countered. What matters is what happens next. Tony leaned forward, his eyes suddenly sharp. Rebecca, think carefully about what you're doing. If this gets out, it won't just be me who suffers. Your reputation, your career, they'll be tainted too. I felt a chill run down my spine at the thinly veiled threat. Are you trying to blackmail me, Tony? He spread his hands in a placating gesture. I'm just pointing out the reality of the situation. We're in this together, whether you like it or not. As I stared at the stranger sitting across from me, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could give in to fear, become complicit in Tony's crimes to save my own skin. Or I could stand up for what was right. Consequences be damned. My phone buzzed, a text from Melanie. I've gathered more evidence. What's our next step? In that moment I made my decision. I stood up, my voice steady as I addressed my husband. No, Tony, we're not in this together, not anymore. As I walked out of the room, leaving Tony sputtering behind me, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, I was choosing my own path, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The morning after my confrontation with Tony, I woke to an empty house and a sense of foreboding. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Martha, each more accusatory than the last. I ignored them, focusing instead on my plan to expose Tony's misdeeds. As I sipped my coffee, a sharp knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find two stern-faced men in suits. Mrs. Green? I'm Detective Simmons. This is Detective Ramos. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your husband's financial activities. My heart raced as I let them in. Of course, but I'm not sure how much help I can be. Detective Simmons fixed me with a penetrating stare. Mrs. Green, we have reason to believe you may have been involved in your husband's embezzlement scheme. The room spun. What? No, that's impossible. I had no idea until recently. We have evidence of large transfers from the firm's accounts to a joint account in both your names, Detective Ramos interjected. Can you explain that? I felt the blood drain from my face. Tony had set me up. He'd made me an unwitting accomplice. I need to call my lawyer, I stammered. The detectives exchanged glances. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Green. Don't leave town. As soon as they left, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind reeling. How could I have been so naive? I'd underestimated Tony's capacity for manipulation. My phone rang. It was Melanie. Rebecca? I just got questioned by the police. What's going on? I filled her in, my voice shaking. Tony's trying to frame me, Melanie. He's always been 10 steps ahead. Not this time, Melanie said firmly. I've been doing some digging of my own. Meet me at the cafe in an hour. There's something you need to see. An hour later, I sat across from Melanie, staring at the documents she'd spread before me. Bank statements, emails, memos, all pointing to a conspiracy far larger than I'd imagined. It's not just Tony, Melanie explained. Half the partners are involved. They've been siphoning funds for years, using offshore accounts and shell companies. I felt sick. Why are you showing me this? Melanie's eyes met mine. Because you're the only one I trust to do the right thing. We can bring them all down, Rebecca, but it's going to be dangerous. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Tony. Come home, we need to talk. I showed Melanie the message. She gripped my hand. Be careful, he's desperate now. I nodded, gathering the documents. I will. Thank you, Melanie, for everything. The drive home felt like a march to the gallows. I found Tony in his study, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand despite the early hour. I assume you've spoken to the police, he said, his voice eerily calm. I nodded, my hand clutching my bag with Melanie's documents. Why, Tony? Why did you do it? He laughed bitterly. You wouldn't understand. The pressure, the expectations, I had to keep up appearances. By stealing, by framing me, I felt my anger rising. Tony stood, swaying slightly. It wasn't supposed to go this far, but I can fix this, Rebecca. We can fix this, together. He moved towards me, his eyes pleading. Just tell the police you were involved. Take some of the blame. With your clean record, you'll get a slap on the wrist. I'll make sure of it. I stared at him, horrified. You want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit? It's the only way, Tony insisted. Otherwise, we'll both go down. Is that what you want? For a moment, I wavered. The thought of prison, of scandal, of losing everything I'd worked for, it was terrifying. But then I thought of my father, of Melanie, of all the people who believed in me. I straightened my spine, meeting Tony's gaze. No, Tony, I won't do it. In fact, I'm going to tell the police everything I know about you, about the partners, all of it. Tony's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You can't do that. I won't let you ruin everything. As I struggled to break free, my bag fell, spilling Melanie's documents across the floor. Tony's eyes widened as he saw the incriminating evidence. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I had to make a choice, protect myself and the truth, or give in to Tony's manipulation one last time. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. I clutched the documents to my chest, my heart pounding as I raced out of the house. Tony's enraged shouts faded behind me as I jumped into my car and sped away. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. I knew what I had to do, but the weight of it all threatened to crush me. My phone rang. It was my father. Becky, are you all right? I've been trying to reach you. Dad, I choked out, fighting back tears. I need your help. Can you meet me at my office? I'm on my way, he said without hesitation. I arrived at the tech startup where I worked, grateful for the weekend quiet. As I waited for my father, I paced the empty office, my thoughts racing. How had my life come to this? When Dad arrived, his worried expression deepened as I poured out the whole sordid story. Tony's affair, the embezzlement, the police investigation, and now his attempt to frame me. Oh, sweetheart, Dad said, pulling me into a hug. I'm so sorry you're going through this, but I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. His words gave me strength. Thanks, Dad, but I don't know what to do next. If I go to the police, Tony might find a way to twist it against me. Dad's eyes lit up with an idea. What about your company's legal team? They're not connected to Tony's firm, and they have a vested interest in protecting you and the company. It was like a light bulb went off. Dad, you're a genius. I immediately called Sarah, our lead counsel. Despite it being a Saturday, she agreed to meet us at the office within the hour. As we waited, I organized the evidence, my hands shaking slightly. What if this backfires, Dad? What if I lose everything? He squeezed my shoulder. You won't lose everything, Becky. You'll always have me, and you'll have your integrity. That's worth more than any job or reputation. Sarah arrived looking concerned. Rebecca, what's going on? Your message sounded urgent. I took a deep breath and launched into my explanation, laying out the documents as I spoke. Sarah's expression grew increasingly grave. This is extensive, she said, poring over the evidence. And you're sure you had no knowledge of this before? I nodded emphatically. None. I only discovered it recently, and when I confronted Tony, he tried to manipulate me into taking the fall. Sarah's jaw tightened. We need to act fast. I'm going to call in the rest of the team and our outside counsel. Rebecca, we're going to protect you and the company, but you need to be prepared. This is going to get messy. As Sarah made calls, I felt a mix of relief and terror. There was no going back now. The next few hours were a blur of legal jargon and strategy sessions. By Sunday evening, we had a plan in place. I would give a full statement to the authorities with our legal team present to ensure I was protected. Just as we were wrapping up, my phone exploded with notifications. My blood ran cold as I saw the breaking news headline, Prominent Law Firm Under Investigation for Massive Fraud Scheme. Tony's face stared back at me from the screen, his usual smug smile replaced by a look of panic as he was led away in handcuffs. It started, Sarah said grimly. Rebecca, are you ready for this? Once we make your statement, there's no turning back. Your life will never be the same. I looked at my father, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Sarah and the team of lawyers ready to fight for me. In that moment, I felt a surge of strength I didn't know I possessed. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. Let's end this. As we prepared to leave for the police station, I took one last look around my office. Whatever happened next, I knew I was fighting for my future, my integrity, and the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The police station buzzed with activity as I sat in the interrogation room, my father and Sarah flanking me protectively. I just finished giving my statement, laying bare every detail of Tony's deception and the firm's widespread corruption. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air. Detective Simmons leaned back, his expression a mix of surprise and respect. "Mrs. Green, I have to say, this is one of the most comprehensive whistleblower statements I've ever heard. You've given us a lot to work with." I nodded, exhausted but resolute. "I just want the truth to come out." As we prepared to leave, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Angry shouts echoed, growing louder by the second. Suddenly, the door burst open, and there stood Tony, his face contorted with rage, flanked by 2 officers struggling to restrain him. "You backstabbing bitch!" he snarled, lunging towards me. The officers held him back as my father stepped protectively in front of me. "How could you do this to me? To us?" I stood my ground, meeting his gaze steadily. "I didn't do this to us, Tony. You did. With every lie, every betrayal, every time you made me feel small. It ends now." Tony's eyes darted wildly around the room, desperation etched on his face. "Rebecca, please, we can still fix this. I'll do anything. Just tell them you made a mistake, that you misunderstood." "No, Tony." I cut him off, my voice firm. "No more lies, no more manipulation. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us, final and irrevocable. Tony's face crumpled, the fight draining out of him. As the officers led him away, I caught a glimpse of Martha in the hallway, her face pale with shock. "Rebecca," she called out, her voice trembling. "What have you done? You've destroyed our family." I turned to her, feeling a mix of pity and frustration. "Martha, your son destroyed this family long before I exposed the truth. I'm sorry, but I won't be your scapegoat anymore." As we left the station, a swarm of reporters descended upon us. Camera flashes blinded me as questions were shouted from all directions. Sarah stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "My client has no comment at this time. We ask that you respect her privacy during this difficult period." We pushed through the crowd to my father's waiting car. As we drove away, I watched the chaos recede in the rearview mirror, feeling both liberated and overwhelmed. "You did good, Becky," my father said softly, squeezing my hand. "I'm so proud of you." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Thanks, Dad. I can't believe it's all really happening." Sarah's phone buzzed incessantly. She glanced at it, her eyes widening. "Rebecca, the story's breaking on all major news outlets. Tony's firm is in freefall, the partners are turning on each other, and there are rumors of a federal investigation." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. The magnitude of what I'd set in motion was staggering. "What happens now?" "Now," Sarah said, her tone serious, "we prepare for the fallout. There will be depositions, possibly a trial. Your life will be under a microscope. Are you ready for that?" The weight of her words settled on my shoulders. Was I ready? Could anyone truly be ready for something like this? As if sensing my doubt, my father spoke up. "You're stronger than you know, Becky. You've already faced the hardest part. Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." I nodded, drawing strength from his words. As we pulled up to my house, the house I'd shared with Tony, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with challenges I couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in years, I felt truly in control of my own destiny. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and towards my future, ready to face whatever came next. The storm was far from over, but I was no longer afraid of the rain. The courtroom fell silent as the judge entered. My heart pounded as I sat beside Sarah, our eyes fixed on Tony across the aisle. He looked haggard, a shadow of the confident man I'd married. As the verdict was read, a wave of emotions washed over me. In the matter of embezzlement and fraud, we find the defendant, Anthony Green, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. I closed my eyes, relief and sadness warring within me. It was over. Finally, truly over. As Tony was led away in handcuffs, his eyes met mine one last time. I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, buried beneath layers of deceit and arrogance. But it was too late for redemption. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Sarah fielded their questions while I stood silently, overwhelmed by the finality of it all. "Rebecca?" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. I turned to see Melanie pushing through the crowd. She enveloped me in a tight hug. "You did it. You actually did it." I hugged her back, tears threatening to spill. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you." As we pulled apart, I noticed Martha standing at the edge of the crowd, looking lost and defeated. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding pass between us. We'd both been victims of Tony's manipulation, in our own ways. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Tony's firm collapsed under the weight of the scandal, taking down several other high-profile lawyers with it. Martha, stripped of her social status and financial security, retreated from public life. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the challenges of my tech startup. My colleagues rallied around me, their support unwavering in the face of the media frenzy. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Jim, my father, waiting by my car. "Thought you could use some company," he said with a warm smile. We ended up at a small diner, sharing a plate of fries like we used to when I was young. "How are you really doing, Becky?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. I sighed, stirring my coffee absently. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Some days I feel strong, like I can take on the world. Other days, I wonder if I'll ever trust anyone again." Dad reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You will. It'll take time, but you will. You're the strongest person I know, Rebecca. You stood up for what's right, even when it cost you everything." His words struck a chord. "Not everything," I said softly. "I still have you. I still have my integrity." As we left the diner, a young woman approached us hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Rebecca Matthews?" I nodded, bracing myself for another reporter's questions. Instead, she smiled shyly. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story, it gave me the courage to leave my own abusive relationship. You showed me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." I was stunned. "I thank you for telling me that. Stay strong." As she walked away, I felt a shift inside me. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a sense of purpose beyond my own survival. In the months that followed, I started speaking at women's shelters and support groups, sharing my story and offering hope to others trapped in toxic relationships. It wasn't easy, reliving the pain and betrayal, but every time I saw a spark of recognition or determination in someone's eyes, I knew it was worth it. 1 year to the day after Tony's conviction, I stood before a packed auditorium, preparing to give a keynote speech at a conference for survivors of domestic abuse and financial fraud. As I looked out at the sea of faces, women of all ages, each with their own story of resilience, I felt a surge of strength and clarity. "My name is Rebecca Matthews," I began, my voice steady and clear, "and this is my story of reclaiming my life from the ruins of betrayal and finding strength I never knew I had." As I spoke, I realized that this moment of connection, of shared strength and hope, was the true resolution of my journey. I had not only survived, I had found a way to thrive and to help others do the same. The applause that followed my speech washed over me like a cleansing wave. I stood tall, no longer defined by my past, but by the woman I had become, strong, resilient, and finally truly free.